this morning. And I can't think of anyone better to start a blockchain Bitcoin conference off than Professor G.J. van Rooyen, who is an absolute evangelist and has some fantastic use case stories to tell us, and he's going to talk to us about how he catches pirates.
Thanks, Ian. And we're not speaking about the Dread Pirate Roberts here. We're talking about media pirates and protecting the ownership of media items, digital media that gets created by artists, by producers, by studios, but landing in a model of distribution where the production becomes unsustainable. Is this thing on? There we go. So the talk is titled Bitcoin and Digital Media and Reinventing Distribution and Protection of Media. I'll talk a little bit about how Bitcoin and the blockchain is used in media in general, why I think media distribution is a particularly informative use case of how we see cryptocurrencies evolving, and a little bit about what we do. Yes, I am an associate professor at Stellenbosch University. We specialize in information and communications technology. I was quite involved in an outfit called the MIH Media Lab at Stellenbosch University, where we looked at ways of combining emerging tech, new things bubbling up in the tech world with use cases where one wouldn't normally associate the application of that technology. And when we became interested in Bitcoin, we discovered that here we have a protocol that you can apply to so much more than just the transfer of value of currency from one individual to another, and became interested in combining this with media. So at the moment, I'm pretty much full-time with one of our spin-out companies, Custos Media Technologies, and we're the guys that use the blockchain to track fair use of digital media when it goes to recipients. And if there's a sort of core message of my talk today, it's Bing. Bitcoin is not gold. The reason I'm saying this is, Simon mentioned something earlier yesterday where he said that if we talk about the regulation of things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and blockchain tech, we should be careful not to think in terms of how money has been used in the past and how regulation for currency flows work in the past. It would have been wrong to regulate the internet in terms of telecommunications, understanding of telecommunications. It became so much more. We have the same risk with cryptocurrencies. Because the first manifestation of blockchain tech is Bitcoin, something that you can use for frictionless payment, the temptation is to think that Bitcoin is a better type of gold, a better type of currency, but that it shares many of the properties we associate with currencies. And I think we saw in many of the talks yesterday that the potential of blockchain tech is so much wider. You can do things with cryptocurrencies, especially things like the next generation cryptocurrencies like Ethereum that go far beyond pure payment and remittance. And if you think about how commerce works in the even in the digital world, but in the pre-Bitcoin world, cash actually works quite well. If we're trading physical goods, if we're trading physical services, cash is good. Electronic transfers work, credit cards work well. Sure, there's a very strong use case for using Bitcoin to make things more efficient, to make it cheaper, to make commerce flow in a better lubricated way. But it's a vitamin to our traditional industries rather than a true painkiller. And my contention is that even if we look at Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as a way of doing commerce, the things that we are going to trade using cryptocurrencies won't just be physical goods. It won't just be a better way of doing e-commerce. It will be the type of goods that are native to the environment where Bitcoin lives. In other words, pure information and digital goods. And if there's one type of digital good that we're all familiar with and that people are willing to pay money for, it's the information that's meant for human consumption, namely media. And I use media in its broadest term as encompassing news, general information, education, entertainment, music, movies, ebooks, all of the types of information that we want to consume as humans and around which economies have evolved. And over the past couple of years, we've seen some interesting developments in how media is used to, or how the blockchain is used to better or to improve the distribution, the production, and the payment of media, and better control how it is consumed by customers. Another point that was made yesterday was, again, that if you look at the early internet, it tried to find better ways of doing pre-internet stuff. The early internet applications mirrored the things we did in the paper world. Paper mail became email, a better type of paper mail. Brochures became websites. The telephone became VoIP, and that took the better part of a decade to really come to maturity. But the real value of the internet, the stuff we do today, things like Wikipedia, like Facebook, social media, Twitter, many of the applications we use day to day, really lay beyond these precursor tech biases. So once we understood the internet well enough that we could start inventing entirely new things and create entirely new markets, the internet really came to its maturity, what we have today. And when speaking about Bitcoin and the blockchain, my message in this talk is think beyond our precursor tech biases. Think beyond how we see commerce using just a better, more electronic kind of gold, and try to invent new markets to which this currency is native, where you can have a pure flow of currency, of value, and information. And my contention is that when Bitcoin meets media in particular, the exchange of useful information, that's when new markets emerge. And because of the properties of cryptocurrencies, the way in which we can do microtransactions, let machines manage the flow of value across networks, have anonymous actors inside this network, whether they are machines or humans, allow us to do these payments and let information flow in ways that simply weren't possible before. And in this talk, I'll give a bit of a catalog of different ways in which people are doing it, including how we use it to track fair use of copyrighted material. And when I speak to the media industry, and this is something that we as a company engage with a lot, not just with the local media industry, but also in Hollywood and Europe, it's the very real risk that when it comes to new technology, the incumbents, the people who have really understood and exploited the market over the past couple of decades or the past century, are often not the first movers when it comes to adopting the new technology. If you take the movie industry, for example, we're at the point where the market leader in media distribution has become the pirates. So over here you might see a site or a utility that some of you might be familiar with. It's a utility that, in my mind, outperforms Netflix when it comes to both efficiency of content distribution and the size of the catalog, and it's something called Popcorn Time. So Popcorn Time is a lovely little app that you download to your computer. It connects to the BitTorrent backend where pretty much everything is available. You wouldn't know that you're torrenting. You don't need to be a geek. My co-founder of Christos literally had his mum install Popcorn Time from the link and started watching movies. And when she was a quarter of an hour into the movie, he told her, "Do you know you're pirating at the moment? You're actually torrenting a movie right now." And she was very embarrassed. She didn't realize it. But it's at the point where the user experience of using pirated utilities and getting to pirated content has become so easy that your mum or grandma can do it. Now, suppose you take something like Popcorn Time, which at the moment is a free service, and well, just to be clear, if you think about the sustainability from a production point of view of piracy, it's even though many people do it, and many of us in the audience have participated in the piracy of media, it's in the long term an unsustainable business model for the production of the type of content that we like to see. If you think about a AAA movie title, it might take hundreds of millions of dollars to produce, simply because it's a very high-grade artwork with a very large number of professionals combining to produce the content. And we're at a situation now where an ever-shrinking group of honest users are paying for the content, going to the box office, renting the movie, subscribing to Netflix, and an ever-growing group of other users are simply accessing the content for free, and it's becoming easier for this group to do exactly that, which is all well and good until the revenue being generated by this tiny and shrinking group over here becomes too small to sustain the production of the next title. And what happens next? Well, what's already happening next is not that movie studios run out of money and stop producing wonderful titles. It's that they start taking less risky bets. We're seeing that already. If you go and talk to the producers in Hollywood, they'll be quick to say that at the moment, they're focusing on sure bets. Sure bets in the movie industry are movies that are targeted at the 15-year-old male demographic, because that's the type of individual who can't go to the bar to drink with his buddies. He is starting to date girls and want to take them out to a place that's a safe and socially not too awkward environment. So the big hits at the moment are action movies, superhero movies, romantic comedies. And go and have a look at IMDb. Go and have a look at the titles that were released over the past decade and the previous decade, and you'll see that transition going to sure bets. And as this group of paying consumers are shrinking, it's moving to more of the surer bets and low budgets for the production of movies. And that's the risk that we as consumers are facing, that piracy is really starting to consume the hen laying the golden eggs. And what the problem is here is not that we're dealing with dishonest, nasty, ugly pirates. It's that the distribution model is broken. We're at a point where we don't have very easy access to people who want to access content and who are willing to pay a low but fair price to access that content. And we believe that cryptocurrencies provide not just ways of tracking fair use of content, but fundamentally different ways of making the media industry operate. The risk, of course, is that pirates get there first. For example, what happens when something like Popcorn Time moves from a free distribution model, as it has now, to a model where subscribers start paying for content, or start paying for early access content, or high-definition content, by paying Bitcoin to the anonymous hosts of the site, who aren't the original owners. There you're moving from a model where no revenue is flowing to the original creators to a model where revenue is flowing, but to a third party that's simply providing a distribution service. And we're starting to see elements of that, not in Popcorn Time specifically, but in some of the other file sharing services out there. So the first part of my talk, I'll be saying a bit about reinventing media distribution. It'll be very Bitcoin focused, and much of what we see here, I anticipate, will transition to some of the more futuristic blockchains like Ethereum. I'll talk about 3 services that try to provide fundamentally different ways of getting content from the producer to the consumer. I'm not specifically talking about movies here, but any type of digital media. The first one is something called Libri, that is really a way of, it's a very libertarian view of how content should be produced and consumed. The creators of Libri contend that the middlemen are not needed at all, that the 20th century have brought us into a situation where we have big media conglomerates or media production houses that have captured the value chain, that have captured the silos, and the people suffering from or being at disadvantage from the siloed approach are the original artists on the one side and us as consumers on the other side. Because the artists don't get the lion's share of what's being produced, and we as consumers are at the mercy of these media houses to pay what they need to make a large profit. And Libri tries to break open, decentralize this model, and provide a service where essentially a producer of content can make it available on their platform. Consumers of that content can pay whatever the original creator wants for the content. The transaction happens via Bitcoin, and the media distribution happens via the BitTorrent protocol. So the BitTorrent protocol at the moment is something that you essentially use for free. Volunteers across the world share their content on their hard drives, and when you want to download something, you really fetch these little chunks and slices from computers across the world, and you recombine it on your computer, and you watch the movie or you listen to the music. And it's mostly used for pirated content. There are good, legitimate users for BitTorrent, but the bulk of the traffic is used on sites like Pirate Bay for accessing content that you shouldn't really have or that you didn't pay for. And Libra is saying that's not the fault of BitTorrent. BitTorrent is a great way of sharing information. It just needs a good monetization model built into it. And I think that speaks to a broader philosophy of how we see cryptocurrencies related to the internet. In a certain sense, the internet protocol was something that gave us a completely democratic way of sharing information. It completely decentralized how we move information from one point to another point. And with SSL, how we do it securely from one point to another point. Bitcoin and its descendants gave us ways of moving value seamlessly and securely from one point to another point. And it's easy to see how these technologies are complements to each other and how they can be combined to let not just information, but information and value flow across the networks. And I think something like Libra is a good example of that, where you get these combined information and value networks. They're completely a direct sales model from the creator to the consumer. When you look at these applications, you quite often see the philosophies of the creators coming out. So similar to Bitcoin, that especially initially had a very, very strong libertarian worldview on how money should be accessed and moved and spent. Libra has a very libertarian view on how media content should be produced and distributed, built on this model of disintermediation, that the 20th century was the century where we had these very strong centralized clusters controlling the flow of information in the media age, controlling the flow of value in the 20th century banking age, and that we need to break out of that. Quite complementary to that is another very similar service called Alexandria. Alexandria is another platform for digital media publication, also built on a peer-to-peer file storage and sharing system. They use a different protocol. They use something called the interplanetary file system, which, unlike BitTorrent, which is a way of accessing content that you know where to find and where to find the peers on the network, it really models the availability of content much closer to the web or a file system, where if you know what the path of a resource is, you can go and fetch that. So Alexandria has a much higher level user interface where content producers can upload their content, can set their prices. And consumers can decide how they want to engage with that, whether they want to act as pure consumers, streaming the content once from the producer and paying a couple of rands to watch a movie, or whether you want to download it to own that, in which case it doesn't stream to your browser or to the application, but you get a copy that's downloaded to your computer and you can watch it again and again, and you pay more for that. Or, and this is something I find quite interesting about how they built the system, or there's an option where you act as a host. So one of the sort of hidden complexities of any type of media distribution is what we call the content distribution network. If you access Netflix, it sort of seems as if you're connecting to Netflix.com and somewhere from a server over there, you watch your episode of whatever you're watching. But in reality, Netflix taps into a global network of servers hosting this content and delivering it to your computer to manage the scale of consumers accessing it from across the world. And that's a very difficult, a technically difficult and expensive process. Alexandria is saying, forget about that. We can move into an era of better content distribution where we let volunteers host the content across the world, and we make the content that they host as reward. They can access that for free or at a very low price. So in the Alexandria model, if you volunteer to host a movie on your computer, you also get free access to watch that. So there's a strong incentive for participants in the network to become the CDN and pushing down the costs for the producers. Because if I want to create movies and create my own Netflix, I don't need to pay for a content distribution network. I get it for free, and I incentivize the hosts in the network with the content itself, which I think is a very, very nice model, because again, it plays into this idea of value and information as value flowing through the network to reward participants to do something that they otherwise would have volunteered to do. It's an interesting example of an application that uses two different blockchains. They use Bitcoin as the payment blockchain because Bitcoin, if you look at all of the cryptocurrencies we have available, Bitcoin has no peer when it comes to trusting a transaction and trusting the value of the currency that you receive. It's been tested. It's fairly mature as such a young technology can be. And that's what you see in Alexandria, that they use Bitcoin as a way to get the payment to the producer. But they use another blockchain called Florincoin to share the metadata, to make the content distribution network work well, because Florincoin has other properties. The blockchain has richer data sets. They can embed fairly large chunks of information about what the movie name is and where it can be found onto that blockchain. That would have been difficult or expensive or slow on Bitcoin. And it's nice to see this sort of marriage of different blockchains collaborating to create a larger application. And that combined with something like IPFS to do the real file sharing. If you're interested, go and have a look at blocktech.com. They have a sample application to download there. All of these examples are young technologies, very alpha or beta stage technologies, because we're in the era where we're trying to explore what we can do with blockchains, how we can reinvent established industries, and we're really trying to figure out what the next step is. Another one in the same mold is a company called Joystream. And Joystream, again, is a combination of BitTorrent and Bitcoin, but with a slightly different angle than Libri. Joystream tries to fix a problem in the BitTorrent protocol. And if you've used BitTorrent, you know that if you have very, very mainstream tastes, you'll be able to find the content that you want on Pirate Bay, and there'll be many people in the network providing the content. We say there are many seeders in the content, in the network. Seeders are people who have a copy of the file on their computer, and if a random computer across the world asks for a chunk of that file, you're able to deliver it. However, if you have slightly more eclectic taste, and you're looking for content that's not freely available or that not many people in the world are interested in, it might be quite difficult finding seeders in the BitTorrent network. And it might be very slow or impossible to access the content that you're interested in. And Joystream says, well, that's because the economic model is broken. Seeders are volunteers. They're making stuff available on their computer. They're making bandwidth available to upload stuff to people who never give them anything back. Why would they continue doing that? Let's change the BitTorrent protocol so that each time you provide a chunk of a file to someone else in the network, you get a Bitcoin micropayment flowing back to you. And suddenly you get paid for being part of this content distribution network. Is it good for piracy? For sure. This is something that would make it possible for John Doe to make money out of piracy. But it's also possible, as it is for BitTorrent, to build a legitimate content producer-friendly service around this, where the content, for example, is encrypted and unlocked when you make a payment. But the idea here is not to create that layer of the application, but to what we call a machine-to-machine micropayment system, where we make a protocol better by letting machines pay each other to provide economic incentive to participate. And this is also a broader theme of my talk, that the interesting applications of cryptocurrencies are not when we do traditional commerce by using a Bitcoin app to buy a bag of cat food from an online retailer, but where we let tiny transactions flow between machines to make the way they interoperate better, or tiny transactions flow between anonymous humans in a network because they participate in performing some other useful task. And I think Joystream is a nice example of machine-to-machine micropayments making a well-known protocol perform better than it would otherwise. Moving from that, all of these services assume that you have content owners, content producers that want to get that content to the recipients, and that the recipients pay for that, reward the producer, and don't redistribute the content outside the walled garden of the platform. And you know and I know that that's not the way that the world works at the moment. Quite often, media gets passed to a trusted party, and that party redistributes it to somebody else. And the moment that happens, when you move out of the official content distribution network, it becomes possible for people to access the content for free or without value flowing back to the original creators. And it turns out that Bitcoin and the blockchain has some interesting applications in this regard as well. The assumption here, and those with a much stronger libertarian slant might not agree with me here, but the contention here is that it's valuable for society to provide a reward to the creators of content, and that the creator of content has the right to set certain terms and conditions about how his or her content is consumed and distributed. So that's the basic premise of what I'm talking about here, that there's a greater good to society if we have a structured way in which creators get rewarded for what they do, because that incentivizes the creation of the content in the first place. And the first example of how blockchains can be used to affect how intellectual property is handled on the internet is a counterexample, a site called Megabitload. So right at the beginning of my talk, I mentioned that you'd really have the perfect black market if you combined popcorn time with Bitcoin payments for the content, because now you have value flowing to third parties capturing the value from somebody else that somebody else created. It's not happening with popcorn time, but it's already happening with file lockers like Megabitload. So you might be familiar with file lockers that were there in the past, like megauploads.com, where content gets uploaded to some other central site. You can either download it for free or pay some other premium and get high-speed access to the content, and that's their business model, getting downloaders to pay for content. Megabitload says, wait, we can do it even better. We can use the pseudonymity of Bitcoin payments to reward the uploaders, to create a service where people upload content. We ask no questions about what that content is. You can set a price for that content. Megabitload takes a cut of each payment that's made by a downloader, and if a downloader wants access to the content or wants high-speed access to the content, he or she has to pay. Payment goes to the provider of the file, a payment goes to Megabitload, and again, you've got a lovely black market working here where content can be distributed and accessed. And this is the type of thing that's great in the short term for getting access to content, but it really makes it difficult to keep the production of media sustainable. Fortunately, there are some media-friendly and ownership-friendly ways of using cryptocurrencies as well. An interesting application is something called ascribe. Ascribe tries to solve the problem of provenance, that you don't necessarily know in the digital world who has the right to have access to a copy of a digital work. And they talk about things like digital artworks, limited edition prints of digital photographs, being able to prove that you were the original sculptor of a work of art, that kind of thing. And they designed a system or built a system that makes it very easy to track the history, the provenance of a digital work, how it changed hands, how many legitimate copies are out there, and who owned them at the moment, and when it was originally created. It's something that supports a copyright, so that if I create a digital work, I can hash it, put it on their system, which really puts it on the blockchain, and there's a provable. There's a proof then that at a certain moment in time, I registered a piece of content. And if someone comes along later and tries to recreate the content later, I have proof that I had access to it at an earlier time. So it's really a way of registering intellectual property at something that is supposed to be considerably more efficient than the CIPC, which talks to a broader theme of blockchains in general, that we have ways of registering ownership, including ownership of intellectual property in our traditional society that are enormously inefficient. And companies like Ascribe try to find ways of improving the efficiency of registering ownership of physical or digital goods in this new era. Lastly, a word about what we do. At Christos Media Technologies, we use Bitcoin as a way of tracking where the original leaks happen. So something that our clients often don't appreciate at first is that very first copy of that digital file, that movie or that ebook that lands on Pirate Bay was uploaded or was shared by one of their clients or by somebody that they know. The original leak is always from someone that has a direct relationship with the content producer or distributor. A good example, for example, we protecting all of the South African feature films at the moment that get released now, and our clients send out these feature films to reviewers and competition judges and film festivals long prior to box office release to start building up a media interest in an upcoming title. And that's where the leaks happen. So a reviewer might get a copy of a movie, they might not care too much about the rights of the original owner and start sharing it with other people, and before long that movie ends up on Pirate Bay. We saw it with one of our South African Oscar-nominated movies, Four Corners, that was leaked a month or so prior to box office release. By that stage, it already had the Oscar nomination, so there was interest among the people who wanted to watch it to go and find that movie, and the poor producers saw their box office takings, their way of recouping their investment in this art movie, completely tank. And if you're talking about indie movie studios, it's sort of a damned if you win and damned if you lose scenario in that case. If they make a movie that exactly 6 people are going to watch, they don't make money. If they have a hit, like an Oscar-nominated movie like Four Corners, and it gets interest grows and it gets pirated, they don't recoup their investments either. And that's the problem that we try to solve. So the service we provide is media agnostic. It applies to movies, music, ebooks. We're working with ebook publishers in the UK at the moment, regularly talking to Hollywood. It's a way of tracking how the original recipient manages the content that he or she is entrusted with. On top of that, we build several use cases, or our clients, for example, the ebook company in the UK, build their application on the API that we provide. And it could be a retail store, it could be, screenercopy.com is our early stage media distribution platform where producers send out content to the reviewers and the judges and the talk show hosts. And we provide a way for them to track that the recipients act fairly with the content that they receive. The way we do that is by doing a clever bit of signal processing when we're talking about movies. For our ebook clients, we use a third-party watermarking client. But essentially, we're hiding information inside each individual copy of, say, a movie that goes out. It's an invisible watermark. It's woven into the analog content and the audio of the video. It's difficult or really impossible to remove without unacceptably damaging the original movie as well. It's like a watermark in a banknote. If you try tearing it out, you're going to damage the banknote itself. So the information has a resilience sitting in there. And here's the rub, the information, the trackable information that sits there isn't just any type of information, it's a Bitcoin private key. Now, if you talk about Bitcoin private keys and addresses, the conventional wisdom is private keys you keep private, you keep close to your chest, because if you lose those, you're in trouble, you're going to lose money. And you publish your address so that people can pay money to this wallet. We flip that around. We say by entrusting a piece of content to an individual and saying, look, Kuni, we know you're a decent guy, you're not going to redistribute this content, and your fidelity guarantee is that this wallet inside the content stays intact. We know you're not going to lose that content. That really transfers an element of vulnerability to the recipient, saying you now have a little bit of skin in the game. You need to play fairly with the content, because if you lose that, money is going to flow out of the wallet that's inside the content, because somebody's going to pick up on that. The movie essentially contains a bounty. We outsource the search for pirated content to what we call bounty hunters, typically inside the downloading community, that has access to a freely available tool that can read the watermark, extract the private key, and sweep the wallet. And they have every incentive to go and look for that content. Even look for it inside the dark web or the places where traditional web crawlers can't reach. For those of you not that familiar with the intricacies of Bitcoin, this private key is like a blank check. If I give you the private key to my wallet, you have access to all the funds in there. You can transfer it instantaneously anywhere in the world. You can do so pretty much anonymously, but only the first person to cash that check will be able to get the funds. So there's a bit of a game theoretical incentive for bounty hunters in the downloading communities to rapidly find the content and to be the first one to find that bounty inside the media. So the bounty gets claimed. We continuously monitor the blockchain. We essentially use Bitcoin and the blockchain as what we call a distributed task market. We're outsourcing the search for pirated content. We're paying the service providers, the people looking for the content, with a bounty. And the moment they claim their reward, the task itself is completed. We see that transaction occurring on the blockchain. We contact our clients and we say, look, we just saw that this individual reviewer's copy has appeared somewhere on a pirate site. Mitigate your risk in some other way. That might be a very low, less aggressive approach. So, for example, our early customers prefer to monitor where leaks happen and not provide early access in future to such individuals. Or it might be a more litigious approach where people enforce their legal rights and try to build up a case against the original infringers. But the service that we provide is one of auditing fair use of digital media, and it's up to our clients how they want to use the auditing information that we provide. So like I mentioned, this is something we call the distributed task market, and I think it's a concept that we're going to see more in the cryptocurrency space in future, where I spoke about machine-to-machine payments improving protocols. Here we have a machine-to-human or human-to-human peer-to-peer payment system where we're outsourcing a very decentralized search for content that we know might be out there and rewarding people anonymously who participate in this system. Claiming the reward, completing the task is a single act. And this is, we think, a nice model for future ways of getting humans to collaborate in otherwise difficult tasks and letting the value flow instantaneously for them completing those tasks. So in conclusion, it's my main angle of this talk is that we shouldn't just think of how we use Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in terms of how we use real money, how we use our EFTs and our credit cards and our cash. Entirely new markets are possible, and if there's one place to go and look for where the new opportunities are, it's where information, valuable information, needs to flow across networks. Cryptocurrencies can become the fuel of information flow. We're seeing that with Ethereum. We're seeing it with some of the applications that I mentioned just now. Stop thinking about Bitcoin as being a better kind of gold that you can trade and that you can spend. It's going to be something that enables the way that we interact and that we use the information network, the internet, in fundamental ways. And I find that tremendously exciting. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it from me. I think we have some time for questions, so please ask away.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was
Thanks,
really
sir.
fantastic. One of the really coolest use cases that I've seen of Bitcoin and blockchain. Right, questions?
Hi, Prof. Just one question in two parts. What kind of reward are we talking about?
It depends. It can be literally anything from a couple of dollars up to hundreds of thousands of dollars, where on the upper end of the range, it's usually where we're working with subcontractors, where a producer sends a movie to somebody who needs to cut a trailer or put in the special effects, and it's possible to put a $50,000 deposit of the recipient in there and saying, well, you're liable for your deposit, and we're going to keep it there until box office release or until 2 weeks after box office release. But the important thing is the value of the bounty shouldn't be so large as to create a perverse incentive for the original recipient to go and extract it himself. So usually we're talking about a couple of dollars because that creates enough of an incentive to university kids and people out there on the internet to go and hunt for stuff and get a bit of a reward.
The reason for that question is what happens if it's never claimed?
If it's never claimed, okay, there's a bit of a subtlety in how we do this. We, for example, don't put the entire reward in the content originally. If you just do the maths and you think about the type of capital outlay you'd need to put bounties in all of the ebooks produced by Amazon.com, for example, well, when we first did the maths, we realized there's not enough Bitcoin in the world to provide tiny little bounties into each of this content. So we only pay out bounties once a piece of media is claimed. We do that by putting in what we call a traceability amount into the content that goes out to recipient. It's minimal. It's the smallest value of Bitcoin that we can put in. But the moment a bounty hunter claims that, we can see that transaction. We can see the address to where it went. We don't know who's behind that address, but we can do the top-up, the full reward to the address itself. And in that way, we only have real money flowing when there's an actual detection of piracy.
Hi.
Hi.
So the idea is that your integrated into your media is a Bitcoin, and it's supposed to be difficult to extract. But one of the core problems with this is now how do you get around the idea of rendering the video and then just re-encoding it afterwards?
It's not difficult to extract. It's trivial to extract. We provide a free tool to extract that Bitcoin.
Well,
it's difficult to remove. It survives re-encoding. That's one of the... if you ever need to hack watermarks or break watermarks, the best way to try to hack or break a watermark is to just re-encode a video with a new type of compression. Because compression and information hiding, and I come from a telecommunications background, compression and information hiding are fundamentally opposite things. The one tries to remove as much information from content to make it as small as possible. The other one tries to stuff in more content. And you really need to know your stuff to be able to develop watermarks or to work with watermarks that survive recompression. And we have access to some pretty good watermarks in that regard. And we also insourcing or are in the process of insourcing similar techniques from overseas watermarking service providers, because this is something that has a good industry built around it. But it's a very good question. It's one of the trickiest parts of actually making the system work. I think that gentleman was the next one.
Hi, thanks. Good talk.
Thank you.
I'm trying to understand, how do you get enough people on the other side that are looking for the code? So that's sort of key to this whole thing. And obviously you can't automate it because then you won't be able to do it at scale. So you need human beings that are busy trawling around, and then it sounds like you have a piece of software which enables you to identify that private key in the media type. So you first have to download, then you've got to run it through the software, and then you might get like $1 or $2 out of it. And so that's really hard. What are you guys doing about that at the moment?
It's fortunately there is an extent to which we can automate it, and without going too deep into some aspects of our secret sauce, there's a part of our bounty hunting process that is automated, and that's running on our own servers and potentially with collaborators' services. So there are many companies out there actively looking for pirated content, and to them we provide a tool, an additional weapon to their arsenal, an additional value proposition that they can present to their clients, but they're assisting in the crawling of the content. And combined with that, there are some other ways, but to get to the real bounty hunters that are inside the dark web and inside the hotspots of piracy, we do what Facebook did, and we target university campuses, because that's where you've got clever kids accessing lots of pirated content and always needing more pocket money, because beer's not getting cheaper, right?
So just a question around, to follow up on that last one. I'm assuming all you have to do is break that private key in your re-encryption or however you. So it's not that you need to rip the whole watermark out. You just need to break it in some way to make it unusable. Now, I suppose the risk is if your technology becomes widely used, there's a huge incentive to create software that undoes
That's correct.
all the good work that you've done. Is that not a catch-22 for you?
Oh, absolutely. It goes even further than that. If you provide a freely downloadable extraction tool, you provide to the attacker something called an oracle attack, where you know when you've broken the system, when the extractor can't get the private key out anymore. Again, I don't want to go too much into some of the subtler things we do, but there are ways to get around that so that you always impose an unacceptable risk that when an attacker has broken his copy of the extractor, that doesn't necessarily mean that the next copy of the extractor won't be able to find that or another watermark that happened to be inside the content. So it's, and I see the gentleman in the blue shirt nodding when you ask your question, because that speaks exactly to that question as well. It's building the risk mitigation strategy around attacks is something that we were very, very careful about to make sure that we build a risk model that poses unacceptable risk onto the potential attacker that his identity will later be revealed, whereas providing enough de-risking to our clients that they know there's a disincentive to their original recipients to go and distribute it.
Hi. Do you think that this technology can eventually be used as the primary way to fund media or to recover the revenue, gather the revenue for the media?
We don't collect revenue. We pay out rewards to bounty hunters out there. But I think and when we present this to the media industry, and we're again doing the big anti-piracy summit in Los Angeles this year, when we present it to the media industry, we make it clear to them that this is one aspect of a larger problem that they need to solve. Being able to audit how your clients act with the content you entrust them with is one aspect. Fixing a very broken distribution model and monetization model around media is the other side of the problem. And you can use the one to start bootstrapping on the other one, but don't neglect the stuff that Alexandria and Libri and Joystream and those guys are doing.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a question which I couldn't understand from the content, but do these bounty hunters have access to that media? Like, are they able, for example, if it's a movie file, are they able to watch it to see what the content is?
Yes. These are typically downloaders themselves. These are pirates themselves. And we distinguish between, the industry, in fact, distinguishes between pirate uploaders and pirate downloaders. The pirate downloaders, although the copyright and media people would love you to believe that downloading is a terrible and terrible thing, breaking, it's like stealing a car. There's actually very little that the media companies can do against downloaders. In South Africa, and probably another thing that the industry wouldn't like me to say out loud, it's not illegal to download a digital file in South Africa. You can be liable for civil case against you for not or accessing somebody's content that you didn't have access to, but you're not criminally prosecutable if you download a file. If you upload a file, it falls under the Counterfeit Goods Act because you're creating a counterfeit copy of somebody else's property, and you can be criminally prosecuted for that. But even in the media industry, although there's a propaganda war against downloading, the producers are quite comfortable with the idea of rather turning these downloaders into snitches and to use that as a way not just to get this intelligence from your distributed task market, but also damaging the social incentives inside the piracy economy. So if you're interested in the broader argument around this, up on our website is our white paper on the economy of piracy. And there's a very, very fragile community incentive between the small number of individuals contributing content and the large number of individuals downloading the content. And by turning the downloaders into the snitches, into the people harming the ecosystem, you're taking away the incentive for the uploaders to provide that in the first place. So there's a larger economic play that we're trying to do here.
GJ, great. Thank you very much. Very
Thanks,
entertaining. We're going to have to wrap.
Thanks. Thank you.